The saga penned by Stephanie Meyer is both the best loved and the most loathed. While thousands of seething fans flock to events, bookstores, and film premieres, screaming all the while, just as many are prepared to tear the book apart on online forums or social media. Dozens of videos exist on YouTube listing Twilight's problems, whether they be political or writing related. As such, the series continues to be the center of an opinion-driven tug-of-war. There doesn't seem to be much opinion in between. Either you're a twihard fanatic, or an outspoken opponent of the work. There has existed no gray area viewpoint, until I came along. I grew up reading the books and watching the films. Even now, they continue to be guilty pleasures for me, as I laugh at the jokes, revel in the atmosphere, and question again why Bella doesn't start a few medications. I can't help remaining interested in the series, because, in my opinion, it is interesting. It might be flawed, and as a writer, I needed to discover on my own what those flaws were. Certainly, the prose can be lacking. The dialogue can be awkward or unnecessary, adjectives can be overused, and some of the characters can be one-dimensional, though a handful, such as Alice, Emmett, and Charlie, have won their own followings. However, for all its flaws, it is my opinion that Twilight has its good points too. You don't sell millions of copies without doing something right. The world building is surprisingly detailed, featuring such concepts as vampire superpowers, weird genetics, shape-shifting werewolves, and the Valkyrie. There's also the town of Forks, which, with its mist-shrouded fields and moss-laden trees, can feel like a character in itself. Whether I discuss the series' pros or the series' cons, both are topics worthy of their own videos. While I'll explore these topics in the future, I want to compare the individual books with one another. Before we continue, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I ramble about fantasy books, obsessing over characters or offering opinions, and I share my own insights as a writer. If any of this sounds like your cup of blood, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. I want to begin with a disclaimer. These are only my opinions, skewed by my own preferences, and as such may not be true or in accordance with how you feel. In ranking the books, not only the writer in me, but the reader in me too will have a say, which means I might rate a book higher just because I prefer its story or characters. With that out of the way, I'll be ranking these from my least favorite to my favorite. Number 1 on my list is Eclipse. This is one of the harder ones to explain for me. Many prefer Eclipse because it's the book which features more action, and there's no shortage of tension between Edward and Jacob. However, whenever I do a reread of the series, I always find myself slowing down on this one. As with the rest of the books, I still enjoy it, but I don't find myself tearing through the pages. My only reason for this ranking has to do, I think, with the amount of waiting which happens in this book. None of the Twilight books are known for their fast pacing, but in this book, Bella waits to graduate, waits to hear from colleges, waits to be turned into a vampire, and waits for Victoria to be dealt with. At least in other books, she's jumping off cliffs, or rushing off to save her mom from a sadistic bloodsucker. Bella's choices are never what you'd call smart, but in this book she doesn't make many choices, good or bad. It's already been decided she'll be a vampire, with the big if removed. We're just waiting for it to happen. The fight with Victoria is exciting, but Victoria was never the reason I read the story in the first place. With the Valkyrie introduced in the second book, Victoria already feels like a secondary victim, a loose end to be tied. It's fun to explore the dynamic between Edward and Jacob, which is more in line with why I read the books. But we all know Bella is going to choose Edward at this point, so it's not the greatest revelation. It is nice to see Bella give Jacob his due, though. At least the reader can see her move on without having any doubts. Number 2 on this list for me is Midnight Sun. For me, it might be as much a lack of familiarity as anything. I've only read Midnight Sun once. However, while I enjoyed it, the book felt long to me. I appreciated the added details, especially when it came to fleshing out Bella's character. But Midnight Sun took what slowed the first book down for me and slowed it down even more. It doesn't help that Edward is a several words per thought kind of guy. This can be interesting, but it also grinds the story to a near halt, because Edward overthinks everything. If you thought Bella was anxious and obsessive, you should peer into Edward's thoughts. He can make a career out of worrying. Even Stephanie Meyer has said she likely won't write more from Edward's perspective because his anxiety was rubbing off on her. As I said, the book does expand the characters. Its high points include those portions Bella didn't see, such as the arguments Edward had with his siblings. At one point, the Cullen family considered killing Bella to mitigate the risk to others. As Edward started befriending Bella, his choices were also weighed by Alice's visions, which we get to see firsthand. Alice's abilities are easier to understand in this story, and help the Cullens in an exciting chase sequence towards the end. While Bella is sulking in a hotel room, the other Cullens are chasing James through the woods, making snap decisions based on Alice's sight, and, most importantly, actually doing something. When Bella is taken by James, the action also ratchets up. High-speed chases and stolen cars are involved, and Alice has fun fabricating evidence for Bella's cover story. While it's only referenced in the original Twilight, in Midnight Sun we get to see it happen. That's where Midnight Sun's charm lies, in it showing us the events we only heard about in Twilight. Certain scenes are also given more weight. For Bella, the trip to the meadow is a nerve-wracking outing. For Edward, based on Alice's premonitions, it's a life or death scenario. Either he'll overcome his weakness and be allowed to remain with Bella, or he'll outright kill her. And seeing himself literally killing Bella in Alice's mind, the stakes couldn't be higher. Alice also has visions of Bella becoming a vampire, showing that Edward's concerns around this particular outcome started early. As with the other visions, we get to see them, and so we sit with Edward's reaction while he looks at a chalky-skinned, red-eyed version of Bella. Finally, there's the fact that Bella becomes closer to becoming a vampire the longer she remains with Edward. We understand the reasons behind Edward's departure a little better, even if we still disagree with them, and we realize that Edward makes his choice fully informed. Through Alice's visions, he sees how emotionally damaged Bella will become as a result of him leaving, and how bad she'll look. Even knowing this, he still leaves. There's a lot to like about Midnight Sun, and in the future it might earn a higher ranking on my list, but it gets a lower rating for how long it is. I love character-driven scenes, but Edward's thoughts make paragraphs 3 times longer and provide more angst than is strictly necessary. Number 3 on my list is Twilight. Twilight has to be given credit for starting it all. The book has the task of establishing the town of Forks, introducing the Cullens, and making readers fall for Edward. Every first book in a series is going to be slightly slower than the rest, simply because it has to introduce so much, but Twilight has the most filler in it. This is because Twilight is Stephanie's debut book. Therefore, she was at her least experienced when she published it. Being a new author, it's likely editors wouldn't have taken the same pains with it either, as they might have with later books. There are more unnecessary scene descriptions, excessive adjectives, and filler scenes. This is the book where Bella meets Edward, which ratchets up the excitement, but it's also the book where Bella does her homework, eats a granola bar, waits for her computer to load, and answers her emails. It's the book where Bella listens to music, learns to cook for Charlie, and reads a book before falling asleep halfway through said book. Bella is not known for being an exciting protagonist, but there isn't a special amount of minutia in this book when it comes to her daily life. I'm all for slice of life, but the descriptions of Bella's meals are akin to those pictures people post on their Instagrams of their breakfast. It doesn't offend you so much as make you ask, why? Since Bella isn't in with the Cullens yet, there's also more time spent with her human friends, who, in the books, aren't as developed as they should be. With the exception of perhaps Jessica, they do nothing to either advance the plot or add interest. Mike mostly serves as comic relief. When Bella is asked out by first Mike and then Tyler, it's comical, but the boys serve no other function in the story. Angela also feels like a missed opportunity. Given Bella is supposed to struggle with giving up her mortality, fleshing out her friends at this stage would have provided a perfect reason for her to question herself. Such a decision shouldn't be taken lightly, but given Bella's friends jump between being annoying, boring, or outright hostile towards her, we instead question why Edward isn't changing her in the first book. Finally, more could have been done to foreshadow the arrival of James and his coven. The film adaptation had the luxury of showing the band's antics before they arrived, but in the book, they appear rather suddenly. Given that 80% of the book is essentially a slice of life, introducing action towards the end feels jarring. It feels like Stephanie realized she needed a climax, and so contrived James to provide one. It's the book that started everything, and it has as much mystery and tension as you could hope for, but Meyer's relative inexperience at its conception places it lower on the list for me. Book number 4 on my list is New Moon. This will be one of my more controversial opinions, but New Moon is one of my favorites. As a member of Team Jacob, I could be biased, but I felt like Bella's character was more fleshed out, too. To be clear, I'm not saying she became a great protagonist. And this is the book where she makes several of her dumbest decisions. But by placing her with Jake, Meyer was able to show us a different side of her. Bella is shy, reserved, and bookish. But with Jake, she becomes social, reckless, and interested in motorcycles. That doesn't sound like much, but given that Bella has only been interested in books at this point, giving her another hobby doesn't hurt. While her motive for learning to ride a motorcycle isn't ideal, she does take a genuine interest in them, and it's one of the few times she rebels against her father. I can't speak for others, but seeing Bella step out of that goody two-shoes role helps me to like her a little more. After all, part of what made Bella unrealistic is that few teens are so well behaved. We all do something bad or stupid at that age. It's again a personal opinion, but Bella's reactions also hook me. Of course, that's a problem in itself. The fact Bella reacts to everything instead of instigating the events of the plot is a problem with the writing throughout the series. On the other hand, even if Bella's motives and choices make you roll your eyes, at least she's making them in this book. With Edward removed, Bella actually has more agency. She chooses to purchase the motorcycles and then to have Jacob repair them. She's the one who seeks Jake out and leads them on any outings. Jacob is the tag-along. Their bonding also feels more natural, as Bella and Jacob seem to have more common interests. They can talk about things and get to know each other in a way which feels more organic to me. Bella, while finding Jacob cute, also doesn't spend half the book obsessing over his looks. Therefore, any feelings she has for him, even if she's unaware of them, seem to stem more from her interest in his personality. They're able to build a solid friendship between them first, before the romance comes in, and for that reason alone, I'm more invested in the relationship. Finally, New Moon is the book that introduces the Volturi to the series, and I love those guys. Whether it be the giggling but creepy Arrow, the sadistic Caius, or the outright psychopathic Jane, they're hard to forget. They also, following New Moon's conclusion, remain a source of unease throughout the rest of the series. Edward's leaving is almost worth it, just to introduce these unnerving villains into the mix. Their superpowers are exciting to learn about too, even if Jane's ability is essentially the Cruciatus Curse delivered Medusa style. Coming in at number 5 on my list is The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner. I've only read this book once, but I loved it. Its immediate appeal lies in the fact that it's not told through the Cushy Collins lens. Instead, we're given a first-hand glimpse into the world of a real vampire. This book is considerably grittier, treating us to descriptions of carnage and human victims. The world building isn't bad either, as we learn humans can taste better or worse depending on certain circumstances, such as drug use. Bree Tanner, the protagonist of this story, also has a much rougher start. Only a teenager, being even younger than Bella, she's a runaway. Growing up in an abusive home, she didn't have the same support as Bella. As a result, she's had to stand on her own and learn to survive, which makes her more engaging than Bella. She doesn't get her perfect life handed to her, but has to fight to live. The story is technically a companion to Eclipse, but with the exception of the end, during which Bree meets the Cullens, it's a wholly original story. Victoria's mindless army of newborns are given personalities of their own and relationship dynamics. Each has a place in the coven, and we see they are as much victims as anyone. Being manipulated by Riley and entirely ignorant of Victoria, the reader actually feels sorry for them. They had no choice in the decisions which led to their deaths. In this book, we also learn what Bree shared with the Cullens, offering further details Bella was ignorant of. Bree knew the Volturi were aware of the newborn army, with them even communicating with Victoria at one point, and Bree was able to relay this information to Edward because of his mind-reading skills. It's a small exchange, but Bree's perspective confirms what we suspected all along, that the Volturi, even then, were fundamentally corrupt. Where the story loses points is in its end. Granted, the author couldn't change it, but after reading this, you'll only feel more anger over Bree's unfair death. Meyer has hinted that even she regrets the decision, hinting she might have changed things if she were to go back in time. Number 6 on my list is Breaking Dawn. I'm aware of how controversial this choice might be too, but hear me out. Out of all the Twilight books, it's the best written. It's certainly not perfect, but in it I can see Meyer finding her voice and solidifying her tone. I enjoy the humor, even if it might be cheesy to others. I love watching Bella cower in the confines of her before car while a gaggle of car nerds take photos of it. Maybe I just have a weird sense of humor, but I consider Meyer's use of humor to be one of the series' high points, and there's only more of it in Breaking Dawn. Call me a freak, but I also enjoy the vampire pregnancy plotline. For me, it adds stakes. Bella might die, and the birth is brutal to her. Up until now, Bella has been sheltered from violence, with the exception of James. But now she has to face the consequences of her choices. Breaking Dawn is one of the few entries in the series where Bella disagrees with Edward on something. They've had their squabbles, but this feels different. For once, you could see Edward being angry with Bella. They start to have real arguments, which makes their relationship seem a little more realistic. Their marriage isn't all sunshine and roses. The tension during the pregnancy phase is constant, forcing even Bella to face conflict. Conflict driven too by her own choice. Bella has mostly reacted to events in the plot up to this point, but it's Bella who A, chooses to actually sleep with Edward, and B, chooses to keep the baby. The plotline feels refreshing to me because instead of being a pile of events for Bella to react to, it's instead driven completely by her decisions. It's also an idea I haven't encountered anywhere else. It's an interesting question. What happens when vampires and humans have children? Can they have them to begin with? Most stories don't even ask these questions, let alone answer them. All in all, the pregnancy phase adds grit to the story, as it features some of the book's more gruesome passages. Even more importantly, Jacob's perspective offers a refreshing change of pace, exposing us to his worries, the personalities of the pack, and the first-hand experience of being a werewolf. In becoming acquainted with Leah and Seth, and receiving a first-person perspective of pack life, the world is opened up for readers. Guarding the Cullens and developing a friendship with Leah, Jacob is a much more active protagonist. Plus, I enjoy his voice. It's distinct from Bella's, right down to the chapter titles. Meyer took a creative risk in switching point of view, but I think she made the right choice in letting us into Jacob's psyche. If we'd remained in Bella's mind, we would have been treated to sitting on the couch, being strapped to a bed, sitting on the couch, and more sitting on the couch. Then there's the insight we gain into the Clearwaters. Leah's previously snarky character is given some nuance, and Seth is adorable. Young, loyal, and willing to give vampires a chance, it's hard not to like Seth. Finally, there's the second half of the book. Some were disappointed there wasn't a climactic battle, but I appreciated Meyer's decision to showcase a battle won through diplomacy. While there might be mixed feelings on whether or not her ending works, at least she took a risk and made an effort to differentiate her story from others. Several characters were also introduced. While this might have seemed overwhelming for some, I saw future potential in their introduction. With the arrival of vampires like Benjamin and Safrina, the whole world opens up. The cast becomes more diverse, more superpowers are explored, and we see the perspective of vampires who aren't straight-laced vegetarians. We're able to see the more human sides of even the bad vampires, and these characters could catapult their own stories or series in the franchise. They might not, but at least Meyer has opened those doors. Moreover, this is the book where Bella gains her agency. As a vampire, she no longer has to be protected. She can make choices, go into battle with Edward, and, most satisfyingly, make a difference. In wielding her super shield, Bella becomes one of the most powerful characters. Others instead rely on her to make the difference, as she is the equalizer in any battle that might occur. Able to render the Valkyries' gifts useless, she gives her allies a fair chance of destroying Arrow and his coven. Arrow seems to realize this, and Bella becomes as valuable to him as Edward or Alice. After spending most of the series as a human punching bag, it's satisfying to see Bella become the ultimate badass. It's cathartic to realize everyone might have been doomed but for Bella. She might seem overpowered, but after spending 3.5 books defenseless, her coming into her own is more than overdue. People will dock points from Breaking Dawn for the whole imprinting debacle, and it might be better to say less about that matter than more. At any rate, I can at least admire Breaking Dawn for its willingness to embrace the saga's weirdness. Breaking Dawn seems to know where it sits, coming across as less overly serious than previous entries, and being more self-aware of its own weirdness, it chases it regardless. In other words, it's a strange story, but it knows that and pushes you through its twists and turns. In conclusion, I have mixed feelings about the series. On the one hand, the books are loaded with flaws. On the other hand, I still love them. In future videos, I want to explore what works about the series and what doesn't. I think the criticisms are justified. However, I also think it's important to recognize what the series did right, especially if you're someone looking to improve your own writing. The book sold millions of copies, and it's worth exploring why. In ranking the series, I've come away with a better understanding of what I both liked and disliked about the series as a whole, and I took an especial joy in explaining why I personally enjoyed the underrated entries, New Moon and Breaking Dawn. What would be your ranking for the series? Which is your favorite entry and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and happy reading.